I want to talk about one of my favorite characters, but I can't because it's a spoiler, so this is a pointless comment, but like, I love them. I love them so much. Hello everybody, it's Kara from Wild Book Garden, and today I'm here with part 1 of my September wrap-up. I know this is kind of late. Long story short, there's a lot going on right now, a lot of changes I have at work and like training and all kinds of things, so I don't know exactly how that's going to impact my schedule going forward, and I do have like some videos already filmed that I just need to like edit and everything, so I'm hoping that this one won't be too late, but if there is kind of a longer gap than usual for my more like time-sensitive videos, like my wrap-ups, and I am still going to do my most anticipated releases for the last quarter of the year, you know why those might be a little late. Like I mentioned in my last wrap-up, I'm going to be reading quite a few books I got from the giveaway I mentioned from Literary Gladiators, and I think I'm just going to like link them in the description for like all the wrap-ups where I have books from them, from their very generous giveaway, so that we're not relying on me remembering to mention that every time. So the first book is one of the books from that giveaway, and that is Red Wolf by Rachel Vincent. This is, I think so far, I think it's a standalone, and this is a retelling of Little Red Riding Hood, but it's definitely got a twist to it. Our main character is a girl named Adele, and one day something happens in the forest where she ends up finding out that the women in her family actually have the ability to shapeshift into wolves. And you don't find this out right away, so normally I would consider that a spoiler, but the synopsis tells you that. And like really the only way I can even give you the most general idea of what this book is about is by mentioning that. So hopefully you guys don't feel like that's a spoiler. But yeah, so she finds out that the women in her family are they have this ability to change into wolves, and that they use this ability to protect different villages in this area. And there's this really like scary wood near where they live that all the other villagers are afraid to go to because of the monsters that lurk in that wood, and Adele and her family are basically what protect the villagers from the creatures in that wood. And the wood is also kind of encroaching more and more on these villages, and so Adele finds this out. She had no idea, so that's already a shock for her, but then she finds out that having this secret that she has to protect now, it's going to affect a lot of things about her life. It's going to affect her relationship with the boy that she hoped to marry. It's going to affect, obviously, what she can do with her life. This was a really interesting book. I liked Adele at the beginning, and I feel like she was very believable. Like, the kind of angst that she was feeling about this like family legacy she had no idea about, it all felt very plausible. Like, it's believable to me why she would be torn between like giving up the life that she had been hoping and dreaming of for so long and doing what she knows is actually the right thing to do and it's going to help protect people. Like, even though Adele is a good person, I think it was very like believable why she would be thrown by having this huge choice kind of thrust upon her when she was not expecting it. But then Adele makes a couple of like colossally stupid mistakes, which I found very frustrating, and those end up like affecting the plot quite a bit. So yeah, like Adele, I kind of had mixed feelings on her throughout. I was also pleasantly surprised by like kind of the romance angle. There is like a little bit of a love triangle situation, but it's not done in an irritating way. And there was one character who I was not sure how I was going to feel about him, but I actually liked him a lot more than I expected, and I like that he kind of backed off and gave Adele space when she asked for it, and when he realized that she just barely learned about this like family power. And I also like that this family power was matrilineal. I just thought that was really cool. The other aspect of the romance I did not find nearly as interesting. Like, I just didn't really understand what Adele saw in this guy, and that's a somewhat important part of the book, is like you buying into their feelings for each other. So I didn't love that. And then there were also just, again, like some plot things, like those decisions that Adele makes that I knew immediately. I was like, this is stupid and you shouldn't do it. And like, she did it anyway. And it didn't feel like it was done. Like, I think she should have known better is the thing. And then I also, like, the ending like chunk of the book, I had very mixed feelings on. Because some aspects I think were really interesting, and like I think Rachel Vincent went some really interesting places with this story, so I admire that, but also like some aspects happened because Adele made those stupid choices. I liked some things, I didn't like others. I gave Red Wolf 3.5 stars, and I do think this is one of the like prettiest covers I have seen. Like, I just think that is so cool, like the design element of that, so points for that too. Next, I finished A Dragonbird in the Fern by Laura Ruckert. This is a standalone fantasy novel, and you may remember this from one of my most anticipated releases videos, and I mentioned that this was one of my most anticipated releases for that quarter and possibly for the whole year, and I am thrilled to say that it completely lived up to my expectations. I really loved this book. I actually have a spoiler-free review that I have filmed that will be going up at some point, so expect to hear more about this, but I thought this was wonderful. We are following our main character Giara, and in this fantasy world, if people are murdered and their killer is not caught, the murder victims can return as kind of ghosts. They're called Earthwalkers, so their spirits are stuck on Earth and they basically continue to wreak havoc that gets worse and worse the longer they're here on Earth, unless and until their killer is brought to justice. And that is actually what happened to Giara's older sister Scylla. She was brutally murdered recently and her family is still reeling from this, and then to make matters worse, because they don't know who killed Scylla, she has become an Earthwalker. So her vengeful spirit is like walking around on Earth and doing all this damage and hurting people, because that's another thing, is the Earthwalkers get more and more violent the longer they are on Earth. And then Giara ends up finding some evidence that shows that her sister's killer was from a particular country, and it just so happens that the king of that country was engaged to marry Scylla before her death. And so then Giara ends up agreeing to marry this king in her sister's place. Like, they still want this alliance between the different kingdoms and families, so Giara ends up agreeing to marry him because she thinks if she goes to this country, she'll be able to figure out who killed her sister and finally like put her spirit to rest and get justice for her. So I thought this was absolutely fantastic. I loved Giara as a main character. She's very shy in a way, and she's also used to thinking of herself as not being especially smart or competent, because Giara has dyslexia, and in this fantasy world there's no diagnosis for that, and there's no real, like, people won't really listen to her when she tries to explain what she needs, and so she's really scared about going to this new country where she does not speak the language at all. Like, she doesn't know the language at all, and she's going to be in this foreign place, and especially because she has dyslexia, that's going to be very difficult for her, but she decides to do it anyway because she wants to get justice for her sister and also protect her and her other loved ones from her sister's vengeful ghost. So yeah, I just really loved Giara. I think, like, I can't speak to the representation, but I think her dyslexia was handled very thoughtfully and in a way that showed the obstacles that she was up against in many cases, because again, people were refusing to make the most basic like accommodations for her, where like just listening to what she asked people for would have made a huge difference. So like, I think the book did a good job of showing what she was up against, but also like her character was not solely defined by the fact that she was dyslexic, and I really liked that. I don't think we see enough of that representation in, like, especially in fantasy books, and I just love Giara as a character. Like, she's so compassionate and she's so brave even though she doesn't think she is. Like, her choosing to do these things, like, she's scared the whole time and she is worried she's going to make mistakes, and she does make mistakes, but the whole time she does these things anyway, and that is bravery. So I just really admired her for that. I also thought the world building was really interesting and really well done. Like, the different settings and like the way these kingdoms like related to each other, and the way that these different places had different belief systems, and I really liked how those belief systems were shown. Like, we saw similarities that kind of linked them, but like, we also saw what made them different. Like, I feel like their similarities and differences were both respected, and I really liked how that was incorporated in the story. I also really loved the romance element in this. I thought that was beautifully done, and I think this book did such a good job of building their relationship, even though at the beginning Giara is struggling to learn this new language, because sometimes, like, I feel like in books where there is that kind of language barrier between the love interests, it can feel a little like weird or superficial that they become close so quickly, or they develop feelings for each other so quickly. But here I thought it was beautifully done. Like, we really see them like interact, even though they do have like limited ways of communicating with each other at the beginning, and we see their connection deepen as they obviously like grow to understand each other better. I also thought the plot of this book was incredibly compelling and interesting. I think I read this book in like basically a day because I had to know what was going to happen. I thought like the murder investigation and like the politics and all these other plot lines, like plot elements, were just very, very engaging. And I think that this book is a really good balance of character work and plot work. So even though I am a character-focused reader, I think even if you are more of a plot person, you might still enjoy this. I also really loved some of the friendships in this book, and I really enjoyed the themes as well, like about, you know, inner strength and that kind of thing. And I also think that grief was handled really well in this book, and there's kind of like multiple layers to the discussion of grief, because obviously GR and her family are grieving Scylla because they have lost this person that they love, so that's one aspect. And then there's also the fact that they don't really have closure because they don't know who killed her. And then there's also the other layer on top of that, that is now this person that they love has, like, they're watching her not be herself anymore. Like she has become this this like pale shadow of who she was, and she's now actually doing harm to other people that they care about. So I just think all of the way that that was handled was really well done. Yeah, obviously I love this book. I gave a Dragonbird and the Fern 5 stars. Again, keep an eye out for my full review. There are some elements of the story that I think, depending on the reader, you might feel like it was a little more convenient. That doesn't tend to bother me, and I feel like in this book it was set up enough, and there was enough other, like, there were enough obstacles in the book that it didn't feel frustrating to me to have certain things work out the way that they did. But like, you know, keep that in mind, that your mileage may vary with that, but I thought it was really well done. Next, I finished Wildfire at Midnight by Mary Stewart. This is a romantic suspense novel. You can tell I've been getting into Mary Stewart this last year. And this was published in 1956, and I think that's kind of that's the time that this was set in as well. We're following our main character Gianetta, and she ends up going to what she thinks is going to be this nice, relaxing vacation on the Isle of Skye. She's escaping like quite a lot of stress in her life, so she thinks this is just going to be a nice, relaxing vacation. And then when she shows up there, it turns out that her ex-husband, Nicholas, happens to be staying at the same inn, and the two of them are divorced, or I think separated, and yeah, they did not leave things on the best foot, so Gianetta is not thrilled about this. And then she finds out that earlier there was this really shocking murder that took place around this inn. And then other accidents start happening and people start turning up dead, and everything kind of goes from there. And this kind of ends up turning into, like, I don't think it's quite an isolated closed circle mystery. I learned that phrase from Mara from books like Whoa. I don't think that's quite what this is, but it is a little bit similar in that people are dying and it has to be one of the characters staying at the inn. And yeah, so this was like a very engaging book. I definitely see why my friend Mary Margaret, who got me into Mary Stewart's books, I definitely see why she said this is one of the darker ones by far, because it definitely was. As with the other books I've read from Mary Stewart, I really liked the writing and the main character. She just writes these very competent and believable women, and I just really enjoy them. The atmosphere was also fantastic in this book. Like, the creepy aspects were done so well. There are two scenes in particular I'm thinking of. One of them where Gianetta is kind of like keeping watch, and that tension was just described so well. And then there's another like kind of chase or like really scary hide and seek situation that takes place like outside on the moors, like in the mist. So like the atmosphere was really well done in this book for sure. As far as the things I didn't like so much, I was not sold on the romance. I kept waiting to like the love interest more than I did, and that never really happened. And then I also think like the solution for the mystery was not, like, didn't quite work for me. I don't know if it was like that I didn't like the solution itself, or that I just didn't feel like it was set up well enough, or both, but it just didn't really work for me. I was like, oh, okay, I guess. And then the other thing is there's a pretty drastic like change in perspective, like this revelation that happens near the end of the book that is like so quick, and I feel like it's a really significant change of opinion, and I think more time needed to be spent on that. But overall, I do think this was really well done, and again, definitely engaging. I would recommend it if you want this kind of like atmospheric, creepy read, and I gave Wildfire at Midnight 4 stars. Next, I finished Traitor's Masque by Ken Lee Davidson. This is the first book in the Andari Chronicles, which is a series of fairy tale retellings. They're companion novels, and this first book is a Cinderella retelling, and we are following two main characters. The Cinderella character is named Tristan, and then our other main character is the prince. He goes by Ramsay or Donovan. So there are two protagonists, and Tristan has not been very happy in her stepmother's home. Like, her stepmother and her stepsisters really don't treat her well. And I think this book did a good job of showing how you can really do a lot of harm to people even if you're not like physically abusing them or like outright like hurting them or anything. And then Ramsay is dealing with some political turmoil in the sense that a lot of people think that his older brother should still be the heir to the throne, even though their father, the king, like cut him out of the succession several years ago because he is not a good person, would be a terrible ruler, but some people still aren't happy about that, and so that's what Ramsay's dealing with. or Donovan, and then Tristan ends up getting an opportunity where she could escape her stepmother and her house forever, and all she has to do is be a part of this kind of like spy plot where she would go to this masked ball, and Tristan kind of has to decide now what she is willing to give up for her own happiness. Yeah, I feel like I'm not summarizing this very well. This is another like very, very mixed bag. I will say that this book in the series, the premise did not interest me nearly as much as some of the others, so even though I was kind of lukewarm on some parts of this book, I am still very excited for later books in the series, and you'll actually see that in my other wrap-up. But I'll start with the good first. I thought this book was really well written. Like, the actual writing style I really enjoyed. Like, the description and the humor and the characterization and everything, I really liked that. I also really enjoyed Ramsey, or Donovan, as a main character. He's just like, he's so tired. He's just trying to do his best, and I just really liked him as a character. I think he's a great example of how you can have a good character, like a good person, you know, who still has conflict and who still struggles sometimes to do the right thing. As far as Tristan, I did not always like her, but I did understand her. Like, I thought she was well written, and I like that from pretty early in the book, like, we see like she's kind of spoiled. Like, she's definitely not as like sweet of a person as I feel like Cinderella characters a lot of times can be. And we see that Tristan is not so much like that. She can be very self-centered, and even though you understand why she is that way, it was frustrating to see her not realize that she has people who care about her. But I like that the book did acknowledge that pretty quickly. So again, I didn't always like Tristan, but I thought she was really well written as a character. And I also thought it was well written why she would make the decisions she did. Like, regarding her spy mission, like, I could definitely understand why, because of the circumstances she was in and because of the information she had, she would choose to do what she did. And like, that's part of the conflict, is then she finds out some new information, and I just think all of that was done really well. I really ended up enjoying some of the supporting characters. I think the plot aspects and like the way that Kenley Davidson played with some of these retelling elements was really good. Like, I just really liked that. I thought the political aspects were interesting, and this is another book I like that it focuses on how politics affects people's lives, because it does, and I just think that was really well done here. As for the things I didn't like, for one thing, this book felt a lot longer than it needed to be. Like, it's quite chunky, and this is like 430 pages about, and it feels like it was very long for what it was, especially because I think the beginning was kind of slow. Like, there were some aspects, at least of the beginning, that I think could have been done a lot quicker. And then also, I was not super sold on the romance for most of this. And that's partly just personal preference. Like, I don't like when the love interests meet very early and have a connection very early. Like, I understand why these people would click, but the way it was written got kind of annoying, because it's like, we can already see why these characters like see themselves in each other or like really enjoy spending time together, but the way that the narration would point it out made it feel cheesy instead of like, oh wow, they have this really great connection. I will say though that by the end of the book, I was very invested in the romance and in wanting them to work things out, so it did improve as it went on. But like, given that this is a fantasy romance, you kind of want the romance to work for you pretty consistently, and that didn't really happen for me. And then another thing that really frustrated me about this book was the strong, not like other girls flavor. As you guys know, if you have watched basically any of my videos, that is one of my least favorite tropes of all time, and I'm really tired of it. And I think that, you know, in 2021, I don't know when this book was published, but it's not that old, like, we're over it. We can move on. And there was just like a very strong feeling of that trope here. Like, it was one of those cases where like Donovan was thinking about how like, oh, in all his royal parties and like events that he went to, no girl had ever talked to him the way that Tristan did. And it's like, okay, for one thing, I don't think I believe that. For another thing, if we do accept that, don't you think part of it might be that these girls are raised to express deference to you as the prince? Like, that just really irritated me, and this book, like there were quite a few times where the book like made a big deal out of how special and different Tristan was, and it was really irritating. There were a couple of other female characters who were better, like who had more depth, who I liked, but it was kind of one of those situations where none of them were in direct like competition with Tristan, where it's like, okay, if you're a few years older than her, or if you're in a completely different setting, you can be a well-written female character. But all the girls that like the prince had to interact with before Tristan are all like interchangeable and stupid and shallow. So that was really irritating. But anyway, mixed bag, but I did like quite a few things about this book. Again, I'm very excited to continue the series, even though this one was not my favorite, and I gave Traitor's Masque 3.5 stars. Next, I finished Velvet Was the Night by Silvia Moreno Garcia. Me and my friend Yvette from Book Cave are continuing our tradition of buddy reading Silvia Moreno Garcia books, and unsurprisingly, I really enjoyed this one. This is a like thriller noir set in the 1970s, I believe, in Mexico City, and it involves a lot of the like protests that were going on against the government, and then the like government sanctioned agencies who would like attack those protesters and, you know, get rid of them and basically like subdue political unrest in the city. And we are following two different main characters. One of them is a young man who goes by Elvis. He's actually like in one of these goon squads who are fighting against these political activists. And then our other main character is Maite, and she is an office worker. She's like a very ordinary person. She has a very ordinary job and life, and she's kind of bored of that, and she escapes through these like romantic comic books that she reads, which, side note, I did not know that was a thing, and I kind of want to read some now. They sound super interesting. And so Maite, like, she has this neighbor who asks her to look after her cat, and then her neighbor Leonora disappears, and so Maite is trying to figure out like what happened to her. I really enjoyed this, unsurprisingly. I've said before, like, Silvia Moreno Garcia can take genres or like storylines that I normally wouldn't like, or like character archetypes that I wouldn't normally like, and she just writes them in a way that I do. And that definitely happened here. I will say, like, go into this book, I think, knowing that Maite and Elvis's storylines don't intersect for quite a while, which is often something I can find very frustrating, but I think here it was done really well, even though I personally found Maite's storyline more compelling or more interesting for most of the book. I still thought Elvis was a really interesting character, and I think that separately there was enough going on that it didn't bother me that those two storylines didn't connect earlier. Also, side note, for those people like me who gets very stressed when there are pets involved in like some very dark like thrillers or books or anything, I just want to put it out there that the kitty is okay, because that was something Yvette and I were talking about. We were both very stressed, and I really love how Maite is such an ordinary character, and I found it so believable how she would allow herself to be swept up in these things that scare her and that she doesn't want to be a part of, but she's tempted because it's kind of her opportunity to be like the main character, you know, like to be in this really dramatic situation that she only ever reads about. I also found the plot of this one really compelling. Like, this was a very engaging book. It read very quickly, and I always like this author's writing. And then also I think that the ending was really interesting too. And along with the main characters, the ending and like certain plot decisions are things where with other authors I would not be satisfied with them, or I would find them frustrating or lacking in some way. But the way that Silvia Moreno Garcia writes them, I think they really work. Like, I think she's very good at them. Like, this ending was not something I expected, but I think it was really perfect for the story. And I really liked that. And yeah, I really liked this. I know this is going to be very hit or miss, like this author's books are in general, but I think especially this one is going to be, like, I don't know, kind of polarizing, but I really enjoyed it, and I gave Velvet Was the Night 4 stars. And I'm also going to link something. Yvette mentioned that the publisher did like kind of a packet, almost like an online packet of like background information about the political climate of Mexico at this time, and so I will pass that on, that Yvette shared with me. I will link that down below, because I do think that is some really important background on this book. And yeah, I enjoyed this one. I know it's not everyone's thing, but I liked it. Next, I finished Through the Moon by Peter Wartman, and I think the illustrator is Zante Buma, and this is a Dragon Prince graphic novel. So the first thing I want to say about this is this takes place after all the seasons that are out of the show so far. So after season 3, this graphic novel happens, and there are massive spoilers for like things that happen in the show. So I would not recommend reading this one until after you have watched all 3 seasons of the show. And in this graphic novel, Rayla is trying to come to terms with basically grief, like certain people that she has lost, and the fact that she's not really able to move on from that. And Callum and the other characters are kind of trying to help her through that, but it's really hard on her. Callum and Rayla decide to attempt something that they think might help Rayla kind of process this grief, and it doesn't quite go the way that they expect. And that's really all I can say about the story of this one, but I really enjoyed it. I really like the art style. Let me see if I can find a page that doesn't spoil things. I don't know if I can. Okay, I think this one would. But I liked the art. I liked the characterization. I think that the characters felt very true to who they are in the show. I liked some of the themes and character work here. There were other aspects of the plot or the character stuff, like basically character decisions, that were not my favorite, but as a whole, I think this was a really well done story. Really liked the art. Again, I love these characters and the humor, and I just loved spending time with these characters and in this world. And I also think it's really interesting that, at least from what it feels like, this plot is going to lead directly into the events of season 4. So I think that's pretty cool as well. So I gave Through the Moon 4 stars. Next, I finished Just Ella by Annette K. Larson. This is the first book in a series of companion books that are like kind of soft fantasy romances. I mean, they're not like fantasy in the sense that there's magic, I don't think, but it is like set in another world. And we're following our main character, who is a princess named Ariella, but she goes by Ella a lot of the times, hence the title. And she ends up forming this connection with a gardener who works at the palace, and the book is about how difficult that is. And it's also about Ella kind of coming to understand herself better, like really growing into herself. I was seeing a lot of reviews for this book that talk about like how light and sweet it is, which is true for some of it, but I also think this book handles some deeper ideas too, which I really liked. For one thing, I think this book did a really good job of actually showing the danger of a royal person being involved with a commoner, because I feel like that's sometimes glossed over a little bit in stories like this. Gavin is our love interest, and like I said, I think that the danger of their situation was dealt with pretty well, even though again this is overall a pretty light and soft story. I also liked Ella as a character, and I like how like complex the family dynamics were. Like there were some characters who I couldn't really make up my mind about if they were doing something like if they loved Ella but they were misguided, or like if maybe they didn't actually have her best interests at heart at all. So I thought that was really interesting. I liked Ella and Gavin as characters, and I actually, like, when they initially meet, I thought their romance was going to develop too quickly, but I actually really like how it developed as the book went on, so that was a pleasant surprise. And I also really liked that the romance between them was actually developed. Like the main reason I don't tend to like royalty plus commoner or like celebrity plus regular person romances is I feel like so often their connection is reduced to just like, wow, they're so different from most of the people they know. It's like, okay, well there's a lot of regular people. Why specifically do these two characters like each other? You know, not just like, one of them's royal and one of them's not, and that's so different, and they are different together. Like, do you know what I mean? I feel like a lot of times that's how the romance ends up feeling, and here that didn't happen. I feel like we actually got a good understanding of why Ella and Gavin specifically liked each other and wanted to spend time together. There was one obstacle with the relationship that I really hated. It's a trope I really don't like, and I think it was unnecessary, and it made me think less of a particular character who we weren't supposed to dislike. So that really frustrated me. I didn't like that. And there was also this really weird thing where like there was a certain character who was set up for something, I thought, and then that didn't happen. It was just, I don't know, resolved in like the weirdest way. I was liking how the story was going, and then we have this other plot thing that happens, and I'm like, oh, I think I like that even better. And then it like didn't happen. And I'm like, well then why did you set it up like it was going to happen? And I also think it was really interesting that this book covered a lot more time than I expected it to. And part of that again was dealing with how Ella really does grow and change. And I also wanted to mention, I think this book did a pretty good job mostly of like showing how, I don't know, showing like why Ella was unhappy. Like it wasn't just like, I don't know, sometimes you read books with like royal characters and it's like, yeah, I get that you don't like this responsibility, but also there are people in your kingdom who are worried about having enough to eat, you know, like, so not that they can't have problems, but I think sometimes there's not a lot of like perspective there, and I feel like this book had more of that. And there's actually this really great part, I think, where we really see that even though Ella is very well off physically, which is not to be dismissed, she really doesn't have control over her life in really, really important areas. Like at one point she's talking about how there's this really horrible person who she doesn't want to marry, and she's talking about what it's like to have your future decided for you in like 2 sentences when she's not even in the room. like the whole rest of her life has been decided when she's not even there. So I just think that that part was done really well. Also, again, enjoyed this, excited to continue, and I gave Just Ella 4 stars. Next, I finished the Deconstructionist Playbook, an anthology that is edited by Crystal Cheatham and Teresa Ta. You might remember this book from a kind of like Kickstarter focused video I did, like some bookish projects that I was really excited about, so I will link that down below. But this is a collection where a lot of different writers talk about, like, it's basically about like deconstructing Christianity and like reconstructing and kind of like addressing and dealing with the harmful aspects of Christianity. And again, I think there's like 60 contributors or something, most of whom are Christian. There's a couple at the beginning who are no longer Christian, and I think a lot of this is specifically geared towards evangelical Christianity, but it's one of those that can definitely be applied to other denominations as well. And yeah, I thought this was really well done. I really like the different topics that the editors chose to focus on. I think they're really important ones. Like, a lot of them are like social justice oriented, like disability theology, LGBT plus affirmation, like liberation theology, race in America, capitalism. Like, I really like a lot of the like topics that this anthology focused on. There's also several writers in here who I hadn't read from before, but I'm really excited to like check out more of their work, so that's always exciting. There are also a few who I already knew I loved, like Caitlin Curtis. Like, some of the sections that I especially loved was the one called Reframing God. Again, I think the queer affirmation aspect was really like an important part of this book. Liberation theology I mentioned. I also really liked the parts like rethinking eschatology, basically. Like, I really enjoyed that. This is actually a book I definitely want to return to at some point and like tab specific sections or quotes or like examples that I really loved. One of the issues I had though was specifically related to one of the chapters, like the one basically on like sex and purity culture, and some of that was really well done, and I know that they, like, the authors and contributors have like a lot to address, like a lot of harm to address that Christianity has done regarding those things. But ironically, that chapter as a whole ended up very like very judgmental. Like, the whole section kind of had the feeling of like, if you are not expressing your sexuality or like having sex like the way that these people are, then you are repressed and need to be like rescued. And again, it was just, ironically, it was very judgmental for a section and like a project that is supposed to be about like the opposite of that. It was kind of like replacing one set of sexual expectations with another set rather than like getting rid of those restrictions altogether. And especially like some of the language from some of the contributors seemed like it was just completely erasing asexual people. Like, there were multiple contributors who were talking about sex as like a fundamental like human need, like as like part of what makes people human and things like that. And maybe the contributors didn't want to edit other people's language too much, but like that kind of language cropped up several times. At the end of that chapter, they did have one entry from an asexual writer, so like, you know, it's good that they included them, but just, I think that part could have been thought out better, especially because, again, so many of these other sections were really well done. And it was especially surprising considering how queer affirming they were throughout the rest of this book. But overall, like, the vast majority of these sections I think were really well done. I would definitely recommend this if this is a kind of book that you are looking for. And I gave the Deconstructionist Playbook 4 stars. Next, I finished a picture book, and that is Where Three Oceans Meet by Rajani Laraka, illustrated by Archana Srinivasan. And this is a beautifully illustrated picture book. Let me show an example. Just really gorgeous. And the story of this one is about 3 generations of women. It's this young girl, and her family are Indian. And so she and her mother and her grandmother all go to India together. And so it's like, geographically it's a place where 3 oceans meet, but also like symbolically it's about like, you know, family and generations meeting. And it's really, really lovely. I thought the themes were really lovely. I thought the illustrations were gorgeous. The one thing, like, maybe this is really obvious to other people and I'm gonna be embarrassed I mentioned this, but one of the only things that didn't work for me in this book is I had a really hard time figuring out like where they were at the beginning of this book, because all 3 of them are together. And so I was like, oh, okay, I guess like their grandmother, her grandmother was visiting from India, and then all 3 of them go back to India together, because the young girl and her mother, I believe, are American. But then like that's not really what seems to be happening. So I'm like, wait, so were they all in India? I don't know. Okay, wait, so maybe it does start off in India, but the trip they're talking about is to a different part of India. Anyway, I'm sure I'm overthinking this, but I just wanted to mention that. But I thought this was really lovely, and I gave Where Three Oceans Meet 4.5 stars. Next, I finished Fly By Night by Frances Harding. This was a reread, and this was our first book that we read for the Frances Harding read-along, which I am co-hosting with my lovely friend Hannah from Lynn Hermione. I will link her blog as well as our first live show down below. We're very excited to have some of you joining us. And yeah, obviously Frances Harding is one of my favorite authors. I talk about her pretty much incessantly. And this is the only book she has that is part of a series. So this book and the next next book that we're going to talk about are a duology, and this one is a really hard one to summarize. So our main character is Masque, and she ends up falling in with this criminal called Eponymous Clint, who just like continuously gets himself into trouble and then attempts to talk himself out of it. And him and Masque are very reluctant allies, but they do end up like kind of having to like work together. And this world is really fractured. It's actually, I think it's actually called like the Fractured Realms is like the name of the world. And there's been like several kind of like revolutions or like dark periods in their history that the people are still kind of recovering from. And I won't get into all the like different political factions and like the history and like who took over when and all of that, because it's a lot. And that was one of my criticisms of this book actually, is even though I did really enjoy it, I think and like some of the setup I found really easy to follow. Like the very beginning I was like, okay, cool, I get this. There were other parts of the book where it was a little harder to keep track of which group was doing what, and kind of like figuring out how this all fit into the same setting and like which like at which time certain things happened. So even though we started with this book, I think interestingly enough, I would not recommend this necessarily as a starting place for Frances Hardinge, just because like the setup of her books is not usually so complicated and hard to follow. But anyway, so Masque and Clint end up like, you know, teaming up grumpily, and the book is about all these different political factions. There's like a lot of espionage and intrigue. Also in this world, books are considered very dangerous, so there's like an element of like discussing like censorship and that kind of thing. And yeah, like I did enjoy this one. I love Masque as a main character, and I also ended up liking Clint, although one of the things we talked about in the live show is I remembered their friendship much more strongly than it actually starts out, because again, like they aren't happy about working together for a lot of this book, but as main characters I really liked both of them, especially Masque. I thought the setting was interesting. I think that thematically this book does some really interesting things. There are several side characters who I really love. Like I just think Frances Hardinge really excels at characterization and at writing. Like I adore her writing style. It's like clever and interesting, and it's got some whimsy, but there's also like always this element of darkness in her books, and just like the descriptions of things and like people in her books are just fantastic. So just her books are always a treat to read. And I also found the plot like really interesting. This was a reread, so I did remember like most of the big things that happen, but yeah, I just think as like the story of this one was really interesting as well. As far as things I didn't like, again, how confusing some of it was. I think, you know, that could have been done better, and also some aspects of the ending. Some of it I liked, and then some of it I think like some of the themes were like less thoughtfully handled. Like there was a lot less nuance than I'm used to from Frances Hardinge. So that was another thing. But again, I did still enjoy this one, and I gave Fly By Night 4 stars. Next I finished The Heiress by Molly Greeley, and this is a historical fiction retelling, like a Pride and Prejudice retelling, following Anne de Bourgh as the main character. And in this book, like if you've read Pride and Prejudice, you know that Anne de Bourgh is kind of a non-character. Like that's, I mean, she's supposed to be. She's very like languid. She's like barely in the book. She doesn't really do a lot. And in this retelling, Molly Greeley follows her as a central character, and she uses laudanum addiction to explain Anne's like personality or actions, which I think was a really interesting storyline to take, and I think it worked really well. So we're following Anne de Bourgh, and as an infant, she was a very fussy baby, and so she was given laudanum because that was something they did then, and she became addicted to it. And her doctor continuously like prescribed this for her. It was like her medicine, and that is what is used to explain her like kind of like her behavior from the original novel. And this book is really about Anne kind of coming into herself. Eventually as an adult she realizes the dangers of opium addiction or of laudanum addiction, and she kind of strikes out on her own. She stands up to her mother. We see her start to make her own choices. This book also has a female-female romance that is really lovely. And yeah, I think this book was really well done. I have read the other book by Molly Greeley, which was The Clergyman's Wife, which I loved. That's a Charlotte Lucas retelling. And I thought this one was really well written as well. I think Anne as a main character was really well developed. And again, I just think the perspective in this book, like the premise was really interesting and really thoughtfully done. Again, I really loved the romance that she had. I thought that was really beautifully developed. I thought thematically this book was really satisfying. I also tend to like stories like this about especially female characters like really kind of coming into their own. I know that's like a phrase I use a lot, but I don't really know a better way to describe it. But it was just very satisfying to see Anne go on that journey. I will say that I expected the laudanum aspect to be written a little differently, and it's, I don't know, it's a double-edged sword, because on the one hand, like, it was already upsetting to read about, like, to read so clearly what it was like for Anne to be, like, for her personality, for her sense of self to be completely submerged under this drug. We see her, like, experience these hallucinations, and like, on the one hand, it was already, like, very disturbing, as it was supposed to be, to see her go through this. But on the other hand, I kind of expected there to be more of an emphasis on how much danger Anne was in. Like, I feel like the danger of opium and laudanum, like, was a little more at a distance than I expected. Because again, like, the opioids crisis, like, then and now, is such a serious thing that I just expected that to be shown as a more direct and active danger than it was. But I do think the book still did a good job showing that. I hope I'm being clear. So basically, I think the book did a good job with that, but I think it could have been maybe a little more clear about how bad things were. And the other thing is that even though I think this book was really well done and there were elements of it that I really loved, as a whole, I think I was more emotionally invested in the clergyman's wife. But saying that, the end of this book still made me cry. Like, it was, like, the emotional aspects were really well done there. So, you know, take that with a grain of salt. It did still, like, emotionally connect with me. Yeah, so I think this is a book that is not going to be for everyone. It does have kind of a slow start. It is very character focused. But I think if you're into this kind of character study, if the premise for this sounds interesting, I think it was a really well done book, and I gave the Heiress 4 stars. And finally, the last book I'm going to talk about in this wrap up is a poetry collection, and that is Today Means Amen by Sierra de Mulder. And this poetry collection, it covers a variety of different topics and ideas. There's quite a few content warnings for this one, so I always put those content warnings in the description box. But yeah, I think the style of this was a really interesting blend of more, like, kind of like more imagery focused, which I tend to associate with older poetry, and then more like contemporary styles as well. As far as the topics, the poems that I think were best, or that, like, I enjoyed the most or got the most out of, were the ones that were more focused on family and on grief and, like, those kinds of things. There were also quite a few poems in this that were on, like, breakups and that kind of thing, which those weren't badly written or anything, just based on kind of what I was looking for in poetry and interests and all of that. I think that the other poems connected more with me, but I don't think that means that the others were badly done. And I've been holding my place because I want to give kind of an example of this poetry, because there were some poems that were really lovely. Like, as with any collection, there were some that don't land, but there were several that really did, and that I thought were very effective and beautiful. So this one is from page 58 and 59, and it's called Floating. He finally passed, and we were grateful. The living crave clarity. Yes, I am alive. No, he is not. Dementia gives none of that. It starves those who remain dry on land. My grandfather spent the past 2 years floating in the river that divides this world from the next. One by one, we offered to pay the boatman to oar him to the other shore. It's okay, we'd whisper, when we thought no one could hear. You can go now. As if death was a secret he had been keeping for years. What I wouldn't give to see what he saw in those last dream months. What images kept him here, long after his body was able to be a body. The cow's udder in his mother's hands, sunlight migrating down my grandmother's sleeping body, the soft, steady bleating of a sheep giving birth. So yeah, like, the poems having to deal with, like, family and grief and loss, I think those were really beautifully done. I do want to mention that there were a couple of poems where I think maybe the author was in, like, possibly murky territory as far as, like, the perspective she was writing from. Like, for example, there was a poem about Coretta Scott King and her grief when Dr. King was assassinated, and, like, I don't know, it just felt, I was surprised that the author, who is a white woman, would write such a personal piece about that. Like, I don't think the poem was badly written or anything, and there were other pieces that were about, like, historical figures, so, like, I don't want to, like, read too much into it. I just, like, wanted to mention that, and, like, it didn't ruin the poetry collection for me, but I kind of stumbled over that. I thought that was a little weird, but overall, I did enjoy this poetry collection, and I gave Today Means Amen 4 stars. Okay, everybody, so those were the books I read in the first part of September. Please comment down below and let me know if you have read any of these books, what you thought of them, or if you're going to pick them up. And again, please bear with me as I figure out these kinds of scheduling things. It might be that it doesn't affect my filming at all and you guys don't even notice, but I just wanted to, like, mention it in case it does, like, affect anything. Thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you soon with another video, and I hope you love the next book you read. Bye!